Over the years, many stories pass generations and sort of develop like telephone, but it intrigues you enough to kind of look into different forms of storytelling, which one of them today we'll be reading off of Reddit. Now, Reddit, most people wouldn't go and look for scary stories, but today I wanted to kind of dive into certain subreddits and find 4 interesting stories to tell you today. So let's get into it. I am a 40-year-old now, but this happened when I was in 3rd grade. One night, me and my brother were asleep in my parents' room. My parents were asleep in front of the fireplace in the front room. I distinctly remember waking up in the middle of the night. I don't know why, I just woke up out of nowhere, and there was a cold chill in the room. I looked down the hallway, which was in my mother's room, which led to the bathroom, and there was a floating green man. He looked to have like a trucker's hat on, like a really big ball cap, and he was coming at me with his hands in like a rapid movement kind of way, twitching and such. I put the covers over my head, and then I heard the blinds move on the sliding glass door. I started getting really scared, and I felt cold fingers on the back of my neck. I jumped out of bed, leaving my little brother in the room, and went out to the living room, not daring to wake up my parents because they would make me go back into my room. So I curled up on the couch, cold with no blankets, until the morning time, and stared at the crack in the door, knowing that my little brother was in there with that thing. When the morning came, I was relieved, but after that, he was never the same. The story took place in 2022. At that time, I was still living with my ex-partner in a small apartment on the edge of town. The apartment was quite old, meaning it had existed long before I was born, but it had been renovated a few years before we moved in. The house has several floors. When you came in, you walked straight into the kitchen. On the first floor, there was a tiny bathroom and a bedroom that we had converted into a living room and office. On the second floor was our bedroom. And finally, in the basement, the room served as both a laundry room and a gaming room. It was quite large. A detail I haven't mentioned, this room was an old cellar that used to be the continuation of a passageway leading from the church to a place unknown to us. I always found the town we lived in rather strange. It's worth noting that I have certain gifts that give me a wide range of sensations. When we moved into this apartment, I already felt uneasy, but I didn't really pay much attention. Too excited about moving in with my ex-partner. Little by little, I started feeling less and less comfortable. I felt like I was being watched. Never truly alone, but I told myself it was probably just me and my imagination playing tricks on me. One evening, while I was relaxing on my sofa in the living room on the first floor, I heard footsteps in the kitchen, like someone was shuffling along in slippers. So I paused my movie and asked my then partner, "Are you downstairs?" No answer. The silence continued when I heard mouse clicks in the basement and my ex's voice. So I thought the sound was probably coming from the movie I was watching or something like that. But the sounds got louder, so I decided to ignore them and keep watching my movie. I heard those same footsteps several times, but eventually I stopped paying attention. Another evening, when I was in the living room again, I heard someone undressing in the bathroom. The same room that was practically opposite to the living room, so it was impossible not to see someone go in. I asked the same question I had asked when I heard the footsteps in the kitchen. Once again, I got no answer. Later that year, another evening, I headed to bed and fell asleep without any problems. Later that night, I saw a strange shape at the foot of my bed, a shadow with bright red eyes. She approached me slowly and then suddenly leaned forward violently. At the same moment, I jumped and the fire alarm went off. I tried to wake my ex-partner, but the alarm stopped immediately. The next day, I went to check if the alarm was still working, and indeed it was. The batteries weren't faulty. The last event I witnessed occurred when I was in the living room that evening. I saw 2 deformed grayish hands on the door frame, slowly emerging from it. I got up to check if anyone was in the hallway, and of course no one was. I never knew the origins of these manifestations. Did they come from the church given to the old hallway that used to be in the basement? Had my ex-partner brought something back from work? Yes, he was working at the funeral home at the time, so it could have been from him. But for me, it only seemed to come from the house, and something still haunts that place. This happened about a month ago, and I still have no answer to it. Two of my roommates, which are siblings, have a family cabin about an hour away from our house, and since living with them, I've been invited up a handful of times, mostly for day trips since the water and electricity is usually off, but we almost always leave way after dark. So I went up to the cabin with my roommates and some friends one afternoon. Their older brother was going to meet us there with his friends and girlfriend as well. So we had a pretty big crew. Before we left, I was told to be careful and aware of my surroundings, since there had been mountain lion sightings in the area. This didn't freak me out too much. I felt pretty safe due to the amount of people who were going to be there, especially since they all brought their dogs, but I kept it in the back of my mind out of cautionary. Before I get into the main event, here's a little description about the layout of the area. The bathroom is detached as an outhouse, a little ways away from the cabin itself. If you walk out to the front door, you take 2 sharp rights before walking down a short path to the outhouse. The electricity was on this day, but there were no lights installed on the inside or outside of the outhouse. If you're standing beside it though, you can see it clearly due to the light from the cabin. So, way later in the day, it was probably around 8 or 9 p.m. at this point. It was completely dark and everyone was inside the cabin. Some people had left, including a couple who brought their 4 dogs, so there was a lot more space to go around. I got up to go to the outhouse. As I was sitting there, I realized that it had gone unnaturally silent outside. Then I heard footsteps slowly approaching the outhouse, followed by what sounded like a long hiss. I froze, scrambling to think of what to do, fully thinking there was a mountain lion on the other side of the door. I said something to let them know I was in there, but I don't really remember because I was so shaken up. I heard a man's voice say sorry, but that wasn't it. I didn't recognize who it was, or I don't even remember hearing footsteps retreat. After a couple of minutes, I mustered up the courage to leave and walk back to the cabin, expecting one of the guys to be waiting by the outhouse, but there was no one. When I got back, I asked every guy who was there if they were waiting to use the bathroom and knocked while I was in there. None of them had. Part of me wonders if my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe I was more worried about the mountain lion sightings than I thought, and made up the hiss in my head. A mountain lion straying so close to a cabin with lots of people around and dogs and all the lights on doesn't make sense. But the other question is, who knocked and apologized? I clearly heard a man's voice, and the knock was so clear. And why was there no one there? And I didn't even hear them leave. I've wondered since if it was a neighbor or maybe a homeless man, but I find these unlikely. My roommate's cabin is on the very end of their neighborhood, and all of the properties are super spaced out. When we were deep in the mountains and probably 30 miles away from the closest city, so it being a homeless person or a lost hiker seemed like a reach. Whoever or whatever it was, though, this experience really creeped me out. I grew up in Missouri, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. Just another dot on the map. Brick buildings, railroad tracks, cornfields stretching out until the sky swallowed them. I lived there my whole life. Gone to the same high school my parents did, driven the same back road since I was 14. That's probably why it took me so long to realize something was wrong. It started during my junior year, late fall, when the sun probably went down too early and the air smelled like dead leaves and cold metal. I walked home most days instead of taking the bus. It cut through a shortcut behind an old abandoned building near the tracks. Everyone called it the feed mill, even though it hadn't been used in decades. One afternoon, I heard footsteps behind me. I slowed down. They slowed down too. I told myself it was just someone messing around. Kids from school like to scare each other back there. But the steps didn't sound right. They were uneven, like whoever was walking didn't know how long their stride was supposed to be. Sometimes I'd hear dragging. Sometimes I'd hear a sharp tap, like bone on concrete. Thicker, like before a storm, and the silence pressed in on my ears. I hurried home, heart racing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me from afar. After that, it happened more often. I catch movement in the windows that reflected the street behind me, something tall and pale that vanished the second I looked directly at it. Teachers would call my name in the hallway, but when I answered, they'd swear they hadn't said anything. Once I heard my mom call me from downstairs while she was still at work. That's when I started losing sleep. The night I really saw it was after a football game. I was cutting through the same shortcut, hoodie pulled tight against the coat. The moon was bright enough that I could see the feed mill clearly. Its broken windows like dark, empty eyes. Something stood beside it. It was shaped like a person, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin. Its arms hung almost to its knees, and its head tilted at an angle that made my neck hurt, just looking at it. Its skin looked too stretched, too tight and pale, like it had never seen the sun, but somehow knew what a human was supposed to look like. I couldn't move. It shifted its weight, joints clicking softly, and when it stepped forward, I realized it had been trying to stand like a person, and failing. Each step was a correction. Then it opened its mouth.
Hey.
My voice, exactly my voice. I felt sick. My hands shook so badly I dropped my phone. The thing tilted its head further, studying me, and its face pulled into something that might have been a smile. Its eyes reflected the moonlight, wide and empty, like it didn't understand fear, only intimidation. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my front door, fumbling with my keys, sobbing, harder than I ever had. I didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? That something was copying me? That it lived by the tracks? But sometimes, when I walk home now, I hear footsteps behind me that match mine perfectly. Fresh footprints in the dust. They're human, almost. Now, all four of these stories connect to each other in some way, which is horror. Something you quite don't understand or want to understand, but it seems too illogical. Something's wrong. Something doesn't feel right when you start looking into something like this. So it's important to pass these stories around. And maybe you might start seeing the same stuff they're seeing. Or maybe you might hear something in the background. Or maybe something might follow you home. So I hope you enjoyed this video today, and hopefully I can find more little stories for me to read for this channel. But until then, I'll see you next time.